right, so today's episode is with Herman Vivier. He is the founder of Bitcoin Ekasi. It's a non-profit based in Mossel Bay, South Africa. Very much mirrored on Bitcoin Beach, and so focused really on a Bitcoin standard, circular economies, adoption. We spoke about some of the challenges in Africa, Bitcoin in Africa, personal responsibility, and then we also got into the upcoming Bitcoin conference that's happening in my former hometown of Cape Town towards the end of January next year. I haven't committed to going yet, but I certainly am going to do my absolute best to go. If anyone's interested and wants to know a little bit more about Cape Town and if it's worth it, just hit me up. I'd love you to go. Cape Town is one of the most magnificent places on earth, and I'm 100% confident you'll love it, especially with my flaming hot tips. Secondly, I'm aware of the fact that my audio and my acoustics are subpar. I'm working on a solution so that I don't sound as if I'm recording this in some sort of echoey, hollowy school hall / bathroom. It doesn't sound good, and apologies for that. Hopefully there's enough signal jam-packed in the episode so that you can overlook it, but I'm working on it. One step at a time. Thanks for coming on this journey, friends. Appreciate you all, eh? And now, let's jump to the show.
Which one's the best crypto asset? Well, Bitcoin's the best crypto asset. Okay. What's the second best? There is no second best. There is no second best crypto asset.
Hello, friends, and welcome to the Why Bitcoin Show. I'm your host, Dale Warburton. It's a weekly podcast on why Bitcoin matters and what makes it completely different to all other cryptocurrencies. If you're interested in Bitcoin and you'd like to distill crypto fact from fiction, you've come to the right place.
All right, Booyakasha. I don't know if that means anything to anyone listening, but I'm very pleased to I'm very pleased to introduce my next guest. I'm going to pronounce his name correctly, but I think for a lot of listeners they might not. Herman Vivier, welcome to the show.
How's it, man?
How's it? That's also another South African one. I absolutely love it. Yeah, Herman.
Yeah.
I first must get out the gates the fact that two things really. The first was we chatted last year when I was balls deep in the shitcoin rag world, and you were very gracious for your time. We had a nice long chat. I remember it was late for you, and you kind of set aside some time there, and I just found myself unable to ever get that through the editorial process. They were more focused on NFTs, and SBF, Legend. So it was a real wreck. And so I'm really pleased that you've agreed to do this for a second time. And I'm sorry if you might have to, I guess, repeat one or two things. But, and then also, my scheduling techniques leave much to be desired. So I'm glad we finally have managed to make this work. So stoked to have you on. Herman, as a sort of brief kind of intro, did you want to maybe just give the listeners like a high level overview as to who you are? I obviously know quite a bit about, your role within Bitcoin Ekasi and the Surfer Kids, but maybe you just want to paint that little story for those who perhaps don't know necessarily who you are and what you get up to.
Yeah, cool, man. High level overview. Basically, I've been running a little non-profit organization since 2010. I'm the co-founder. My wife and I started the organization. It's called the Surf Kids Nonprofit. We essentially started the organization at the same time as we started a business in the tourism industry, specifically in the surf tourism industry in South Africa. Yeah, I've been running that organization, and it's been 13 years. Coming up on 13 years at the end of this year. Yeah, and then at some point during COVID, during the lockdowns, the Surfer Kids just, I just, for various reasons, decided to flip the organization onto a Bitcoin standard, essentially, and to use the organization to start an additional project, which is Bitcoin Ekasi. And Bitcoin Ekasi is basically just an effort to pay all salaries for people who work for the Surfer Kids in Bitcoin. and to try and start a Bitcoin circular economy by doing that. So it's the salaries of the coaches who work for the surfer kids that form the core of what powers the circular economy in the township. And the surfer kids operates in a township. It's a very poor area outside Mossel Bay, which is a relatively large town in South Africa. And I mean, anyone familiar with the South African situation would know what that means, but for international audience, it's basically a slum. And so we get kids from there, and we teach them surfing as a way to get them to do something constructive. And I basically manage the organization. We're a team of 12 people now, 12, 13 people. So it's a pretty small organization, but it's very exciting. It's inspired by Bitcoin Beach. So anyone familiar with the Bitcoin Beach story, that's pretty much what we do, except adjusted for a local context.
Wow. Yeah, that's a great story. And I didn't realize there were so many people kind of full-time working within the nonprofits. I mean, that's quite amazing. How does the actual nonprofit itself fund itself? Is it through, I mean, I'm assuming donations, but where are they coming from?
So about half of that team works full-time, the other half works part-time. So full-time we have six, 7 people working full-time, and then part-time is another 5 or so. The organization it's a donation-based nonprofit. So the Surfer Kids has been a registered nonprofit since 2014. It's a tax-exempt donation-based nonprofit. So in order to maintain its tax exemption status, most of the income has to be donation-based. There's no sort of we can't really engage in income generating trading activities, or we risk losing that tax exempt status. So yeah, it's donation based. We have in the past played with the idea of doing more sort of trading like business activities to fund the organization, but I've always come back to the donation based model, because I find that the initial aim was to do something for the kids, and the more we focused on trading income, the more it takes the focus away from the children. So we just always came back to the donation based model. And I think that there's room for organizations that rely on charity and other people's generosity. I know a lot of people have issues with charity, and I understand why, but I think if a nonprofit can stay small and nimble and don't spend large amounts of money on overheads and administration and so on, then it makes sense. Because most of the money that gets donated to the organization literally ends up with the kids that we're trying to empower, because we don't have a massive overhead and we don't plan on growing the organization bigger than what it is at the moment. For the most part, donations were from private individuals until Bitcoin Ekasi sort of started gaining notoriety. We got a bit of a wider reach. And so the last year, we have seen a lot more support coming from influencers in the Bitcoin space. We have seen support coming from some companies. There's been some very generous donations from some of the large companies in Bitcoin. And
fantastic.
Yeah, and I think that's basically how it goes. I mean, I think people appreciate the effort, and we're trying to encourage adoption, and we're trying to build a sort of a model for what's possible.
Yeah.
So it's a kind of a testing ground in a way,
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's that kind of, in a sense, there's also that first mover advantage. You could almost equate what you're doing to something like what Peter McCormick's doing with Bedford, in the sense of trying to, he's trying to put his football team on a Bitcoin standard. And then here in Australia, the Perth Heat have done something similar, but it's a way of getting more eyeballs on an issue that really matters. And what I've also found just in my engagements with the Bitcoin community over the last couple of years is that they do tend to be very keen and willing to support good causes. And I think, to the point you were raising earlier, like a lot of people have that sort of innate distrust of large charitable organizations, because you might be you're hoping that you're actually impacting like real individuals' lives, but you might just be funding all the administration and overheads, as you say. So I think that's pretty exciting. So let's talk now about you're paying these salaries to the employees. And I also know you've got the sort of orange pill efforts. Maybe you got your kind of orange pill foot soldiers, if you like, trying to orange pill folks in the community so that they can actually create a little circular economy amongst themselves. I know you've got like you've got a barber, and then I guess the equivalent of like a little corner shop or cafe that's involved. How do you get that message across to that sort of demographic, as opposed to if I was trying to sell it to like a high net worth individual, I'd be like talking about, digital gold or something like that. But how does one distill it into something that resonates with, I guess, people from those sorts of backgrounds?
I mean, personally, most of my time is spent managing the staff of the organization, and about half of them are focused on Bitcoin adoption in the community, whereas the other half is focused on the program that we run for kids down at the beach. And so, but all of them are getting paid in Bitcoin. So most of my time is spent actually either managing the organization, which is literally like just managing people, strategizing and going forward and handing out instructions and that sort of thing. And the other half of my time is sort of spent trying to foster Bitcoin education amongst the staff, and they are then the ones who go out and orange pill the community, so to speak. I don't actually spend time going around the community talking to shop owners. We have staff members who do that, whose role it is to go around to the shops and support them. I mean, one of the important reasons for that is, in the South African context, it's just one of those harsh realities that, I'm an outsider in this community in my own country, and that's the segregated nature of South Africa. It's sort of a hangover from the apartheid regime, and it's not something that's going to disappear anytime soon. One might as well acknowledge it because it is what it is. But the fact of the matter is that I can't just walk into a township and be taken at face value. People are gonna want to extract value from me because they see a walking ATM, a walking cash machine, basically, and that's just the reality. And it's not, so. But more important than that, really, is that empowerment has to come from within. And so my approach has always been to try and educate a select few people and then have them uplift the rest of the community through education. So I very carefully select the coaches that I work with, and then those coaches go out into the community, particularly the one coach that I've been working with the longest, which is Lutando. He's the one that onboarded most of the shops. And so obviously we've spent a lot of time talking about it, and the way he does that, the way he sells Bitcoin to those shops compared to the way I would sell Bitcoin to a high net worth individual is, I would talk about ideology and problems that are in the future, but that one can recognize today. Things like inflation or asset confiscation or those types of things. Those are problems that are not affecting a high net worth individual today, but they are problems that might affect a high net worth individual further down the line. Whereas when Lutando goes into the township, he's addressing problems that are in that person's reality right here, right now. He's not talking about stuff that might become a problem further down the line. And it's things that we might consider small. For example, we had an incident, let's say about 2 weeks ago, where one of the people that we've onboarded in the township, who has now started using Bitcoin slowly but surely, he discovered that he could buy a voucher with Bitcoin from his phone using Bitrefill, which he could then upload onto his favorite sports gambling website, where he could then gamble on the soccer or whatever, And for him, this was a massive revelation, because previously he always had to take cash out of his little box where he kept it in his shack. He had to walk to the nearest corner store. He had to physically go and buy a paper voucher, which he could then bring back to his shack and then go on and bet. And so, having a digital form of money eliminated that having to walk back and forth physically with a piece of paper in his hand. It means he could do it from home, which is much safer, because walking around the township is with cash, especially, it's not something that, there's the risk of being robbed is exponentially higher in a community like that. And so these are problems that people have right now. And that's really how Lutando has onboarded shops. He's basically just demonstrated what you can do with Bitcoin, and people have gone, hey, I really want to do that. It's not there's not much ideology in their conversation.
Yeah, it's almost as if it just works. You know what I mean? It's fulfilling some sort of role, and it just and it's plugging some sort of gap that exists. As opposed to the idea of having to persuade someone as to the merits and the risks and the benefits and the network effect and the difficulty adjustment and all this kind of stuff. Like that's all kind of irrelevant in that context. And what you were saying earlier about being an outsider, I think for anyone who's listening, I mean, it's something that I say to people pretty regularly, and I wouldn't say always, but let's say from at least say 2016, 17, started feeling as a distinct outsider in my, the country of my own birth, where I just felt like I couldn't relate to all the issues that were going on. And I was just coming from a privileged position on the outside. And, as you said earlier, like you can just walk into like a bar or a cafe there and go, hey guys, by the way, I've got something that could really protect your purchasing power because the rand's going to shit. They'll be like, who's this guy? Like, what does this Mlungu want? And it's you need people who have already got that trust and those relationships to be able to do it. You can't have an outsider come in and persuade. So I think that's actually quite interesting. Now, the question that I always would ask somebody who's engaged in these circular economies, I mean, there's two things that spring to mind, but let's start with the first is, how do they actually deal with the volatility issue? I mean, presumably if you're getting paid in Bitcoin and all your goods and services are in Bitcoin, then it's not the end of the world. But let's say for like, the shopkeeper himself, as an example, if he's buying bread, he needs to go and get, he's going to be accepting Bitcoin. And then he's got to go and buy bread in fiat and then bring it to the shop. And there's that, his margins could be compressed or blown out depending on what's happening with Bitcoin at the time. So, I mean, how's that actually played out, in real life?
I mean, it's very simple, really. I think, and I've kind of said this from the very beginning. Like, the volatility of Bitcoin is one of the reasons why I didn't want to grow this project massively. When I say grow massively, it's like on the ground, the number of shops we have on board, etc., etc. Obviously, the project has gotten quite a bit of reach on social media and so on, and for that I'm very grateful. But the reality is that on the ground, it's a very small project, and by keeping it small, we protect people against volatility. Because, for example, look, well, first of all, let's talk about the coaches. The coaches, the staff that work for the Surfy Kids, they earn 100% of their salary in Bitcoin. But obviously, the amounts that they earn is tied to a rand value, which is the local fiat currency. So when a new person approaches us, we'll say, well, look, this is the salary. It's X amount of rand per week, but you'll get paid the equivalent amount of sats on a weekly basis. So because it's paid weekly, and because they spend most of their sats pretty quickly, because we don't pay massive salaries, the volatility isn't so much of an issue. I mean, we had a recent price drop, I think it was through the course of last week, of around 10%.
Yeah.
Maybe even, it was more than that, actually, more than 10%. So a significant drop in price. When I paid their salaries Monday 2 weeks ago, they received X number of sats, which was equivalent to an X rand value. And the following week, after the price drop, they received a completely different amount of sats adjusted for the Bitcoin price. And so every week they're essentially receiving a stable value in local fiat terms, but it's being paid in Bitcoin. And so the volatility doesn't affect them week to week. There might be 3 days between let's say 4 days between a Thursday or a Friday and next week Monday, where they'll see a drop in price. But then as soon as they get paid again on the following Monday, the amount of sats they receive is adjusted back up or down, depending on what happened with Bitcoin price. So the volatility doesn't affect the coaches too badly. Obviously, if they're saving long term, then that's going to affect them, because I do encourage that they save. We have at least half of our staff members saving for the long term in Bitcoin. But there
Awesome.
we all know long term the volatility is to the upside. Year on year, Bitcoin has a pretty solid track record. And if it's sort of medium term spending within the next month or so, then there's all kinds of stable coin features that they could look at. There's a stable Sats in the Bitcoin Beach wallet. But the shop owners are the ones who accept the real volatility risk, as you pointed out, with margins being squeezed. And the thing is about keeping the project small is that, it's only a small amount of a shop's turnover that's coming in Bitcoin, because we have 11 people getting paid in Bitcoin and we've got about 12 shops on board, but there's 5,000 people living in the township.
Yeah.
So it's not as if the shops are receiving 70% of their turnover in Bitcoin. They're receiving maybe 1 to 2% of their turnover in Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And so a price drop is not exactly going to bankrupt the shop owner or make a massive impact. And the ones that do stay on board, they see the volatility as an opportunity, because they've seen the price go down, but they've also seen the price go up again. And so they kind of go, well, okay, this can obviously go both ways. So, we do lose some shops, but then we get other shops on board, and the ones that stay on board. I mean, the first shop that we onboarded has been on board for 2 years. We've been buying with her for 2 years. She's seen the price go from pre-bull market levels at the height of the bull market to the lowest lows we had a couple of months ago, back up to where it is now. And she's been on board throughout all of that. So for her, this is a massive opportunity to save for the long term. She saved more than anyone else.
Wow. That's amazing. So you can get that point across that actually, like, if whether it's the coach receiving a salary, whether it's the shop vendor getting Bitcoin, if they're able to retain a portion of that income or earnings in Bitcoin, actually it's more advantageous to actually see a price drop. You get more sats at the end of the day. And if they understand the concept of stacking sats for the long run, it's actually they get more bang for buck, as it were. The other thing I was just thinking as well is, and I totally agree with you, by the way, on keeping it relatively small, because what I think a few people actually realize, at least from a developed world kind of perspective, is the vast majority of people, particularly in townships and that sort of thing, they are not really even capable of saving. Like they're literally living, with sort of income equals expenses, if that. They might have literally a negative situation. So it's very hard to see how, at a mass scale, in light of the fact that you've got high levels of unemployment and all these kinds of things, that you would be able to have just Bitcoin just being as the unit of account and medium of exchange writ large. I think it makes sense to keep it on a relatively contained basis, at least while it's highly volatile, and then over time you can slowly but surely grow it. I mean, you could almost say the last 6 months have been, I think the last 6 months, I saw an article about three weeks ago or so that said actually Bitcoin's been less volatile than S&P 500. So you're actually kind of like, because it was just sitting between, it's like at 30K. I mean, now I think it's about 26, at the time of recording. But anyway, okay, so that's the volatility side. Because it is the show that it is, the Why Bitcoin show, and the whole show, I haven't even told you, but the whole show kind of originated from the torturous experience I had at two shitcoin rags. But I learned a lot, and it was a great way to really further entrench my toxic maximalism. One thing I have concerns about, obviously, when it comes to sort of developing nations and then coming across things like Bitcoin, is all the grifters and all the shit coins that cloud the waters or muddy the waters. And it's really, from my perspective, disheartening, because they've got endless amounts of marketing dollars, and they really are, it's ultimately good Bitcoiners on the ground that are slowly but surely trying to market and build this thing. And then you've got the shitcoiners like Charles Hodgkinson and all these kind of folks flying into Africa. And so that's a little bit of my rant over, but how have you witnessed crypto as opposed to Bitcoin, at least with the project that you described?
Yeah, I mean it's a very important question, but it's like one of the central questions for me. Just one last point on that question of saving in Bitcoin and unemployment being massively high in the townships. Youth unemployment in South Africa is 62%. General
Unreal.
unemployment, yeah, no, it's unreal, man. And the general level of unemployment, I think we're over 35% now. So, but the thing that excites me most about this project, and this has been like sort of for the last 6 to 8 months, I would say, is I don't want to orange pull that entire township. But what I would like to do is, and this is busy happening, is I would like to see, there's about 3 senior coaches that are saving in Bitcoin, maybe 4 of them, and saving significant amounts in Bitcoin. And let's say maybe six business owners that are saving significant amounts of Bitcoin. That's about 10 people, right? In a township of 5,000 people, that's not a lot. It's not, I mean, it's a small minority. But what I would like to see is, if we go through the next bull market, what impact does that have on the mentality of those 10 people, right? Because it's sort of like winning the lottery, but very, very, very slowly. And in the process of winning the lottery, you're learning a lot. You're learning the value of long-term commitment. You're learning the value of saving and accumulating capital. You're learning the value of personal responsibility. You're learning all these things in the process of becoming wealthy, slowly but surely. It's not something that happens overnight. This is what most people get wrong about Bitcoin. You don't get wealthy overnight. You get wealthy over the course of 10, 15 years if you do the right thing. But you could just as easily lose everything. So it's a very valuable life lesson. I would like to see what impact does the next 2 to 3, maybe 4 to 5 years have on the mentality of those 10 people that are saving significant amounts of Bitcoin. And then I'd like to see if there's the positive mentality change that I know is possible, because I've seen it in myself and I've seen it in other people. What impact does that have on the 50 to 100 to 200 people around those 10 people? And then how does that spread out? How does that spread out in a ripple effect? And that's what excites me most about this project. And it comes back to saving in Bitcoin and saving for the long term. With regards to why
that's Bitcoin, sorry. Sorry to interrupt there, but Herman, that's fantastic. I'll tell you that I couldn't agree more. That is a super way to think about it, because Bitcoin is all about sustainable growth, and I'm definitely going to be asking you some questions about, like, what you've sort of learned from Bitcoin on a personal level, and you were touching on some of those themes there, and so it changes you as an individual, and then you spread that amongst your acquaintances. And I think the numbers, like the Dunbar numbers, like 150, you can only really keep up with like 150 humans. So you think about, if each of those 10 people, and maybe there's a degree of overlap, you think about how they, over the next decade, let's say, or 5 years, go like, this is what I've done, this is how I've changed my life for these reasons. I think that's how it all grows. And yeah, I think there's lots of reasons to be optimistic. So anyway, just wanted to chime in there, but let's talk crypto. Tell me about your crypto story.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, I went through a crypto phase like everyone else. My first Bitcoin wallet was a Bitcoin Core full node back in 2013. And when Ethereum came out a year and a half later, I was like, okay, cool. So, now you've got Bitcoin and now you've got Ethereum, and they're going to do different things. It's going to be so exciting. And so let me run an Ethereum node. And I tried that and it didn't work. Trying to set up an Ethereum node crashed my computer. And it was the same computer I was using to run a Bitcoin node. So I was like, well, this just seems odd. I should be able to run a full node. Otherwise, what's the point, right? It's not a decentralized network if I can't run a node, right? So that's kind of where I started questioning the whole like world computer thing. But it was very early days. I had a whole bunch of shitcoins that I was holding on to until 7 years later in 2020, and that's sort of when I got rid of all of them. And I was just like, there's just no way I can keep up with this. Like the number of, I mean, I hardly have enough time to understand the intricacies of Bitcoin and Lightning. I just can't keep up with the 70 or 80 different cryptos that I was trying to figure out which ones are gonna go up, which ones are gonna go. Like it's just not possible. So it was a very pragmatic decision at that time. So like, fuck all of it. Yeah. Sell everything, just put everything into Bitcoin and dedicate myself and commit myself and, sort of singular focus on one really important project and let the rest of the shit figure itself out. Because to be honest with you, like, I think after enough time, anyone is going to become disillusioned with project after project after project that promises the world and delivers nothing. You know, even Ethereum itself, like, I just don't see what exactly has it delivered. Like, it's changed course so many times, and most of the hype cycles, there's always something different happening on Ethereum. I want to focus on something that I know what I'm focused on for the next, 10 years, 15 years. I don't want to constantly reorient myself in terms of what is the goal. Like, and Bitcoin has a massive task ahead of it. It's got, we're talking about, about replacing the dollar as the world reserve asset, basically. I mean, that's essentially where we're going. That's a massive task. It's not like you're not going to bring down that beast by pricking it with 1,000 toothpicks. You're going to bring down that beast by picking up the biggest fucking sword you can find and chopping its head off. And so that's the way I look at it. Like, I don't see the point in having, and besides, like, from an educational perspective, I mean, if I'm out there dealing with the coaches, it's been 2 years that we've been running this project, and we're barely scratching the surface of how Bitcoin actually works. Like, you don't have to understand the technicalities to start using it. Like, hardly anyone understands how an operating system works underneath the hood, but everybody's using a PC.
Yeah.
So you don't have to understand the technicalities, but I'd like to have the project, based in education. I mean, education is everything. It's the bedrock, it's the foundation. Like, without that, you've got nothing. And so after 2 years, we're barely scratching the surface of Bitcoin's technicalities. I mean, there's just no room for going on about crypto this, crypto that. It's just, you just don't have that kind of room. And I think people who have room for that, like, I respect them. I mean, if you can understand the technicalities of Ethereum, Bitcoin, Cardano, Ripple, if you can grasp all of those things on a technical level, good for you. You've got a very clever mind, but you live in a techno bubble, because 99% of people don't have the capacity or the bandwidth to do that, and you just can't expect them to do that. And throwing 1,000 different cryptos at them is actually irresponsible, because you don't have a hope in hell of educating them about even the first one properly. I mean, that alone is a massive task. And I speak from experience. Like, it's a massive challenge teaching people on the ground how Bitcoin actually works on a technical level.
Yeah. I totally agree, man. And it's crypto has always got these shiny new objects, and it's always got like this new feature or this new thing, but it's not really obvious to me what problems they're solving, and they aren't decentralized, as you say. Decentralized in name alone, or there's no real there for the most part when I think about it. And for the average person, they do so well, just stay the hell away. And I try my best, but unfortunately, a lot of people still believe, they're late on Bitcoin, but hey, there's dog money or some other thing. And to an extent, I think as part of Bitcoin, again, you mentioned earlier, personal responsibility. Like, take control of your life, man. If you want to dabble in that bullshit, it's up to you. I mean, I met this poor woman at a Adelaide Bitcoin meetup some time back, and she clearly was going through some personal drama, and she went all in on Doge, on a self-managed super fund, which is a pension fund that she administers. And I just thought, like, what level of analysis was going on there? Like, I'm sure it's just like, it's like literally, there's that clip from American Hodl, which is just like, crypto's nihilism. It's like, I'm either going to drive a Lamborghini or I'm going to be fucking homeless, because I don't know what it does. I don't care if it's vaporware, but I'm just going to go for it. And the reality is, most of the time it doesn't work out. So yeah, I'm so grateful to be out of that space and putting all my energy into something that actually matters. That's money, sound money, and not all the fake currencies. I mean, I don't even want to call them currencies, because they're more like, they call them projects here in Australia, but they're companies, man. So anyway, like, I don't want to whinge about crypto anymore. I'd love to dive now a little bit into kind of why you are so passionate about Bitcoin in particular. I've read and heard interviews elsewhere where you've talked about how it's changed your life in other respects. And I think this is something that resonates with a lot of people, myself included, obviously. I'd love to hear, what it's done for you on a personal level. And feel free to share as much or as little as you like.
Yeah, I think on a personal level, Bitcoin, I kind of, how can I put it, almost like pivoted towards the ethos of Bitcoin at the same time as discovering that, because, and it sounds maybe strange to say that, but what I'm trying to say is that in 2013, two very important things happened more or less at the same time. I walked into my first meeting as a recovering addict in 2013, and I was introduced to Bitcoin at the same time. And so the basis for recovery from addiction, and this is the one thing that matters more than anything else, and it's the difference between people who are able to live, or it's a difference between addicts who are able to live clean and addicts who are not able to live clean, and that is taking responsibility for your own problem. There's no one else that can fix that problem for you. There's no amount of, nagging by parents or spouses or friends or family that's going to get you to live clean if you don't want to. You either want it or you don't. You either take responsibility for it or you don't. And I walked into that meeting desperate to stay clean. I tried everything to quit on my own. It didn't really work. And through exposure to this sort of these principles, and I mean, the program is based on these very like really valuable, almost like life principles. One can almost call them spiritual principles. It is a very spiritual program, and it's got these deep roots in all kinds of spiritual traditions. But it's not a religious program at all. There is no dogma. Every person who walks into that meeting is able to decide for themselves how to discover the principles, and it can take you 2 days, it can take you 10 years. It took me 4 years before I eventually sort of grasped it. But the point is that I walked into this meeting, and I found the same thing there that I found in the Bitcoin ethos, which is personal responsibility. That's what it's all about. You are never going to, what's that saying? I forget the saying, but it's something along the lines of, bad people ignore laws and good people don't need them. If you're a conscientious person, if you're a responsible person, you don't need an external authority to tell you what is the right and the wrong thing to do. And if you're not a conscientious and not a responsible person, no amount of external authority is going to stop you from doing a bad thing. So at the end of the day, it all comes down to personal responsibility, and I've even pre-Bitcoin, it just kind of, because of my exposure to this program, well, not pre-Bitcoin, but in the very, very early days of my Bitcoin journey, it just kind of like made intuitive sense to me. Like, this is one of the reasons why the world is in such a mess, because we as a civilization, we as a species are dependent on external authority to tell us what to do and how to live, and that's never going to work. Not in a million years are you going to be able to run a civilization successfully by relying on external authority. You're either going to live in chaos, which is what we have now, or you're going to find a way to teach people personal responsibility from the day they are born. And then you have a hope of creating a civilization that actually works. And so, Bitcoin just kind of like cemented that for me. Like I can articulate it a lot more clearly now. And whereas in the beginning it just felt like an intuitive sort of understanding. Bitcoin helped me, but Bitcoin helped me to put that into very real practical terms, because it tackles this irresponsibility in one very particular material way. And so if you talk about it purely from a personal responsibility perspective, it might sound very ethereal and non-tangible, but whereas if you talk about it in terms of Bitcoin, it's like, well, this is what they're doing. They're printing money. It doesn't work. It's going to end in tears. this is the solution. It's a sound, hard money. This is the difference between the two. So it just helped me articulate these ideas. But at the end of the day, I see the underlying basis as a sort of a spiritual understanding. And that understanding comes down to a very simple set of principles. And I think that entire set of principles can be summarized in one sentence or two words, which is personal responsibility. Like, that's what it comes down to at the end of the day. And, you know, you gotta extrapolate from there. Like, you cannot just every single problem say personal responsibility. Like, you gotta have to extrapolate from there. But I think everything that you need to live a productive, healthy, constructive life can be extrapolated from that basic understanding. And so Bitcoin is just really, but Bitcoin is like one of the sort of motivators along that path. Bitcoin and then recovery from drug addiction. Those two things are both two different forces pushing me in a similar direction, if I can put it that way.
Got you. That's an awesome story, man. And it's like, it's almost like personal responsibility is the starting point for addressing many of the challenges in your life. You got to first own them and be real and introspective and go, this is actually what's going on. And I'll put a link in the show notes, and if I find it, I'll DM you. I love this little rant by American Hodl. It goes, no one's going to step in and save you. You've got to step in and save you, kind of thing. So it's like, you know, in the context of Bitcoin, it's about extreme self-ownership and personal responsibility. You know, you're your own bank, you know, and you've got to take control of your own keys. And in the context of life, like there seems to be this pervasive feeling amongst, and this is why there's perhaps a lot of nihilism, where it's just like people refusing to take responsibility for their lives. Like, you know, I feel bad for people that are like clinically obese. You know, it's clearly a sign that things aren't great. But you know, you see these videos of these influencers bitching and whining because they can't get two seats next to each other. They want special treatment because they've just, you know, eaten a lot more because they've got other things going on in their life. And you're like, get a fucking grip, man. Like, look inwards. Like, you know, what happens if we all did that? And and I've been having more conversations, you know, with regards to things like, I actually just had a conversation yesterday of people on social welfare, and you acknowledge the need to have a safety net. And however, you find in many developed countries, it's actually abused, you know, because people just don't want to take responsibility for their life. So it's such an awesome thing to hear how it's changed in a dramatic sense. And I honestly can say the exact same thing. It fills me with a lot of hope. I have something that's, you know, it sounds a bit, it's this thing's becoming a bit trite, but this bright orange light that sort of, you know, we're moving towards, you know, Bitcoin is hope kind of thing. And yeah, I think personal responsibility lies at the core of that. So the last thing I want to touch on there, Herman, before we roll today is I know you cats there have been working on a conference that's up and coming. And yeah, I got some whispers of it just by virtue of being in a group, and I was like, oh God, I can't believe this. The first Bitcoin conference in Africa. Tell us a little bit about what that is, and kind of how that sort of originated. What's the story behind Africa's first proper Bitcoin conference?
Well, I mean, just first of all, I would say that it's not the first proper one on the continent. There was a very solid Africa Bitcoin conference in Ghana last year in Accra, and I was fortunate enough to attend. And
there we go. So I look like a total fool. Sorry. There we go. Maybe
no.
I'm just hometown bias. I love Cape Town.
Yeah, it's the first one. I mean, I don't know. It's hard to say. It's hard to say who is first, because there have been other Bitcoin conferences in South Africa before. Some of them more crypto than Bitcoin. But and there are so many Bitcoin conferences around the world. You could probably travel to a different conference every single week if you had the money and the time to do that, and you would be able to literally go to a conference every single week. That's how many conferences there are around the world. So but what we are trying to do with this conference is a little different. So we wanted to try and create something unique, to obviously differentiate it from all the other conferences out there. And I think South Africa finds itself in a relatively unique situation where you have a relatively developed country. It's not completely developed. Obviously, it's still a developing country. But what is happening in South Africa is you have a situation where government institutions are sort of retreating, and the most obvious example that we see is the electricity situation, where in South Africa, all electricity are generated by a government-owned enterprise. Eskom is completely government-owned. They are the only people who can sell. Well, they own the grid. They own the entire national grid. So you can't just come in, generate electricity and sell it, because Eskom has this monopoly over the national grid. But they are falling apart. It's because they are falling apart that we are experiencing this thing called load shedding, where they switch off parts of the grid because they can't generate enough electricity to service the economy. And so that's one example. There's South African Airways, which is a government-owned airline, which is also falling apart. And there are examples of entire municipalities in South Africa where the municipality is just, disappearing. There are parts of the country where there's no longer any police patrols on the highways, and trucks are getting hijacked and stopped and burnt, and because it's sort of like a Wild West type situation. And it wasn't always like that. So because of corruption, things have been getting progressively worse over the last 10 years. After the democratic elections, for the first 10 years or so, I'd say things were going pretty well. There's a lot of optimism. But now with the sort of slow collapse in government, private individuals, civil society organizations are stepping in. All right. And so there's a lot of this happening in the country. And we want to bring those people who are stepping in and filling the role of traditional government institutions. We want to bring them together with Bitcoiners from around the world, because I think those two groups can benefit from one another. The people who are building parallel institutions in South Africa, the people who are developing private highway patrols, the people who are, taking over municipalities with privately run municipalities, because otherwise it becomes gangster's paradise. Those people are going to have to, not going to have to, but it would be of great benefit to them to learn more about Bitcoin. A lot of them are already very much into Bitcoin, but they're not public about it yet, because there's some hesitancy about, all the stigma surrounding Bitcoin. It's for drug dealers, it's for criminals, blah, blah, blah. So those people, if we can bring them together from Bitcoiners from around the world, they can benefit. South Africa can benefit, because I believe those builders of parallel institutions need Bitcoin. And I think Bitcoiners from around the world can learn from these people, because as Bitcoiners in the rest of the world, like what's happening in South Africa is essentially going to happen everywhere else. I mean, every government that is printing its way into oblivion, this is what's coming, right? I mean, where is the United States of America heading? Like, it's not going to happen tomorrow. It's not going to happen next year. But eventually something's got to give, right? And
Absolutely.
then people are going to go, and then what's going to happen then? Well, then what's going to happen is private individuals or civil society organizations are going to have to step up to the plate and say, okay, we're going to step in where the government has stepped back. And so this is already happening in South Africa, and Bitcoiners around the world love to talk about this. But it'd be great if we can bring them to South Africa and say, hey, look, there's people who are actually already doing this. And when the time comes, you could learn from them and they could learn from you. It's sort of like a win-win situation between those two groups. And that's what we want to bring together. We want to bring together Bitcoiners from around the world and from South Africa with people who are building parallel institutions in South Africa.
Awesome. That's great, man. I mean, I do agree with you in the sense of, all countries are on a bit of it. I mean, the amount of debt we have. I had a chat yesterday with someone, and global debt's at like 92 trillion, and something like 3.3 billion people live in countries where the interest payments on their debt are higher than the amount the government spends on healthcare and education, as an example. Do you know what I mean?
Exactly.
It's always a case of like, who's the least worst in my mind. It's not as if like there's a good one. I mean, maybe there's a couple that are trying, but and I tend to look at Australia as like it's one of the least worst in terms of directionally. Some people here who are born and bred in Australia would disagree, but I think it's actually relatively chilled. But we've actually had these discussions because I belong to a couple different groups, and we created something called there's a thing called the Bush Bash, the Bitcoin Bush Bash, and we go to these remote towns and meet and talk. That's one thing. And then we created a little sub-varietal called the Bush Bash, where we go and camp in nature. And one of the things that came up in the conversation, this is my mate Brisket, who pointed out, was about building resiliency. It's and this is something that people are starting to think about here, at least within the Bitcoin community. So I think the interests are very much aligned, as you say, like and we often find in meeting at these, whether it's the Bitcoin Brisbane meetup or wherever, we don't often sit there talk. I mean, people would imagine you're just talking about price and stuff like that. It's like, no, we talk about all the other things. It's almost everything other than Bitcoin often. And resiliency and trying to, I mean, it was almost like the discussion really went something along the lines of like, we don't ask for permission, we just start. And it's like, there's all these laws about like, okay, you can't grow bananas on your land in Australia. As an example, you need to apply for a permit to do that. As an this is maybe in this particular state that I live in. And so it was like, people were just like, I don't care. I'm just going to grow fucking bananas. I want bananas. And, people just starting to try and create some resiliency. And then you got like, people like, okay, I don't want to just start eating all this factory farm crap. Why don't we just start pulling our funds together and buying beef directly from the farmers? And there's a thing called the Australian Beef Initiative, where they're trying to form that closer relationship between the people who produce our food and actual consumers. And so you create some resiliency there. Get yourself a bloody deep freezer and buy half a beast with a mate, or you go Harvey's. And this is what people are doing here. And it's kind of small scale. And then you take South Africa and people are like, all right, okay, we've got holes in the roads. Let's fix that. We've got people coming in and just breaking in nonstop. We need private security. And I saw it when I lived in Johannesburg, how, this is something that no one in Australia could even fathom, is the idea of like a gated community within a suburb. So, the place I grew up in, the East Rand, you can't even get into these streets anymore. And it's not as if it's like a proper security complex. It's like, no, there's booms, and you need to like who you're going to and all this kind of thing with cameras. And I mean, yeah, the US, I mean, is another whole nother story. It's pretty sad to see what's happening. So I actually love that, because all the conferences, they have a different sort of flavor, and that's a very interesting way to think about it in terms of like combining those industries and then also people and freedom, really. And taking ownership of your life, because you can sit and bitch and moan about South Africa, or you can actually talk to the people who are, again, taking this into their own hands and say, we're going to fix this ourselves because the government's useless.
Yeah, I mean, South Africa is kind of like a little bit of a lens into the future for many countries. And I've listened. I've listened to quite a few podcasts recently where I think it was Parker Lewis I was listening to not so long ago, last week, where he was talking about, I mean, there's no easy way to transition from one reserve asset to another. There's no pretty picture where default is sovereign debt defaults are an easy situation. These things are going to be troubling times. Not that I want them to be troubling times, but that's just the reality. And so we are going to have civil society organizations, private individuals who are how can I put it, trained in what to do when the state can no longer come in and fulfill its function that it has fulfilled for so long, and I actually find I consider, I mean, South Africa has a lot of drawbacks, but I consider myself fortunate to be in a situation where I don't have this expectation to have the government come in and provide, right? Because I think people who live in countries where that is almost assumed are going to have a harder time if and when the time comes where, and I mean, these things can change very quickly, right? You can have a situation where one day everything seems fine and the next day it's just like, well, sorry, we can't. There's no, I don't know, there's no electricity or whatever, there's no water, there's no. And then if you have a sort of a not a preparedness mentality, I don't like people who prepare for the end of the world, but just you have a mentality that, hey, this is possible, like this is not, it's not off the table, right? And in South Africa, we already know that it's more likely than not. So we're kind of like prepared for that and be prepared for building alternatives.
You're 2 steps ahead, basically, of the lazy Westerners who are just very reliant on government. Because basically, we've got a deep distrust of government, and we recognize that they are just incapable of doing almost anything right. And so we've got like a head start of almost 20 years of trying to do shit ourselves, as opposed to people living in the nanny states where, they just used to like having everything handed on a platter. And it's a very good point. I actually haven't thought about that before.
It's a deep mistrust of government, but it's also a mentality to go out and make a plan. Because one of the things, so I've spent a lot of my wife is Russian, and so I've spent a lot of time working with Russian tourists over the years because our business caters for Russians primarily. I mean, we kind of like entered the market at a good time there. And so we didn't have much competition. So over the years, we've built quite a solid base as a destination for Russian tourists. And one of the things I could identify with my Russian clientele was this distrust of government. They've been fucked over so many times. They don't trust government at all. I mean, but at the same time, what was different was that even though they distrust government, there's also the sense that, well, government has to build the roads. Who else is going to do it? Like, we don't trust government, but there is no alternative. They have to do it. Whereas in South Africa, it's like, well, we don't trust government, and there has to be an alternative because the government's not doing it.
I love what you were saying. Like, you make a plan. I actually have used this in a few podcasts. A boer maak 'n plan. If a farmer makes a plan, just roughly translated, like, we just will find a way to get shit done. When you will run through brick walls to make things happen, because nothing would happen without the private sector, and it's patently obvious. And that's what makes me really, it makes me kind of sad in some respect, because it's pretty sad to see what's happened to the country. But in terms of like South Africans and their resilience and determination and their ability to weather just endless just it's malgovernance. It's not even malgovernance. It's just like it's a criminal enterprise just running the show. It's just it's so sad, but I just love how South Africans are able to remain optimistic, and they just get shit done. Like I've spoken about Eskom, and 8 to 12 hours a day in some cases, electricity. Okay, well, if you're privileged, like, you got to go and make a plan. You get solar, you get inverters, and but people still live. Things still happen. It's not as if the world stops. Whereas if you had no electricity in Australia for like 6 hours in a state, people would be losing their shit. So it is interesting. But I'm so stoked to hear that there's this conference coming up, and it does sound as if it's got like a unique flavor to it, and there's just nothing more exciting than also spending time with real Bitcoiners. I personally would love to make the mission. I'm not too sure if I'm going to be able to do it. There's just so many things I want to do for the remainder of this year and next year. We've got we've got a conference circuit here in Australia called the Bush Bash. I'll tell you about it another time, but I try to get to those as much as possible. It's almost like it's a triannual gathering, and it's almost like going to church, Bitcoin church. You just hang out with your Bitcoin brothers and sisters and connect and chat, and you just feel so like rejuvenated afterwards. So I'm sure the same will be happening there in Cape Town. Yeah, I think that's all I have for you today. I've really appreciated your time, and thanks again for doing this a second time. I promise this is going to get published because I'm the boss of my show. Yeah.
No stress, man. It's all good.
Awesome. Did you want to maybe give the listeners and viewers maybe like a little handoff as to where they can find you, follow you, and what I also like you to do is separately send me a DM with Bitcoin Ekasi's Lightning wallet. So if anybody wants to support the show, they can just do a quick zap.
Cool.
Not the show, sorry, the projects.
No, I got that. No, I got that. Yeah, we've got a website, bitcoinekasi.com. Otherwise, we are on Twitter. The handle is @BitcoinEkasi, and I'm spending more time on Nostr. So we are on Nostr as well. For what it's worth, since being introduced to Bitcoin way back then and having seen so many shitcoin projects come and go, some of them still around, Nostr is the first time I feel the same sort of enthusiasm for something that is Bitcoin related from a technological perspective. I don't know why. I can't explain it. I'm not technical enough, but it just feels like the trajectory that Bitcoin has seen over the last sort of 13, 14, 15 years, like that's what's going to happen with Nostr, because it's solving a real problem. Like there's Bitcoin, there's 20,000 shitcoins which are all irrelevant, and then there's Nostr which is relevant. I kind of see that's how I feel about it. I think so I'm spending more time on Nostr, but I have no idea how to give you that handle because it's this long fucking string of letters and numbers.
No, ditto. I also I've been shout out to Matt Odell who's been promoting it. I also am wearing a Citadel Dispatch hat there. Shout out to Reezy who hooked me up at the Bush Bash. But Nostr, as far as I can tell, is going to almost be this interoperable social media thing where you can just message people across platforms. So, the interface can be whatever the hell it can be, but it will be this base protocol, and you'll own your own data and not all the Web3 phony bullshit, but actually really, and it's all done with cryptography. And when I was just from my perspective, when someone said, okay, if you're on Facebook and you want to message someone on Twitter and you can't, well, here's a protocol you can, so that if we're all on this Nostr protocol, that's how we can make it happen. That's how emails from Gmail can go to Outlook. Anyway, but I'm not technical, but it sounds exciting, and I think when the UX and UI get better, there'll be more adoption. But for us right now, we can just go, and it's mostly Bitcoiners, I think.
You just gotta search for Bitcoin Ekasi on Nostr, and you'll find it one way or another.
Okay.
I mean,
okay, cool.
I don't, but it works.
Nice. Herman, I'll be watching from afar, and thanks so much for your time, bro. Really appreciate it, and thanks so much for all you do for the community. It's much admired and respected.
Thank you,
man. Awesome.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Cheers, eh?
Thanks for listening to today's episode. I hope you enjoyed the conversation and that you got some value out of it. Either way, hit me up on Twitter and let me know what you think. My handle is Dale21M. If you've got any suggestions as to people you think I should be talking to or topics I should address too, I would love that sort of feedback. Otherwise, if you want to support the show, there's a couple different ways you can do that. The first is just to share it amongst your friends and family. The more that people hear the message that Bitcoin and crypto are not the same thing, the better. And I want to help people understand that. The second thing you can do is give me a 5-star review on whichever podcast app you're using. Of course, that's only if I deserve it. And last but not least, if you want to stream sats my way via the Fountain app, I'm not going to say no, but it's not expected. Thank you so much for your support thus far. It means the world to me. I appreciate the hell out of you, and the best is yet to come. Much love, friends. I'll see you on the other side.